All right, welcome everybody to our live webinar series, How Can I Help You Right Now? Powered by Startup Canada, which is part of, actually Startup Peel, which is part of Startup Canada, by Aldine Simlisler Consulting, my consulting firm, ITS Global, which is represented by Ross here today, which is a staffing and recruiting firm. We're also powered by Enunciate, which is an AI-powered language testing platform. So today we're talking to Desi Narayanan. Am I pronouncing that right? I feel like
that's pretty good. Narayanan.
Yes. Okay, there we go. He is joining us from Building Perspectives, a company that he founded a couple of years ago, specifically focused on helping companies implement lean and optimizing methodologies to improve their business systems. So I'm not going to take too much away from Desi by way of introduction. I'm going to give him an opportunity to share with us in a 60-second intro about himself, and then we're going to launch into our live Q&A session. So we have a couple of questions that we're going to be talking about, a couple of topics that we're going to cover. And then I'm going to invite our participants to feel free to hop on in and ask any questions. And for those of you that are catching the replay, feel free to drop your comments and questions below the video. And Desi and I will be paying attention to them and be sharing that information with you as those questions come through. So Desi, your 30-second intro.
That's good. So my name is Desi. I founded Building Perspective a long time ago, back in 2006. And really what happened is, it's interesting. It was founded based on a bet. I was dating a girl. She's my wife now. And I used to do process improvement for fun in most of my free time. And she asked me, she told me, why don't you do this full time? I said, no one's going to pay me to do this. So just to prove my girlfriend wrong at the time, I did a fake engagement and sent out a fake invoice, and I got a real check in the mail. And so in 2006, Building Perspective was founded. So that's how I started the company. So for everyone, for everyone here, you should know the company was founded by mistake. That's what happens. So,
intentional mistakes.
Intentional mistake. And so yes, I married the girl, and I built the company, and we're thriving as of today. So that's a little bit about me. I practice something called Lean Six Sigma. It's a fancy word for process improvement. It's a very deep methodology. I might even venture to say it's my religion. I practice it both at home and outside, and that's what I do. If I'm not sleeping, that's what I'm doing.
Perfect. And I'm pretty sure you're going to come up with a methodology to do that in your sleep too, right?
Yes.
Awesome. So without further ado, we want to dive into the topic. How do we actually 10x our productivity by combining people and process? In our kind of pre-webinar conversation, we were talking about, the common misconception that companies, typically have, where they think of productivity and optimization starting with the technology. And we are going to be sharing some reasons why we feel a lot differently. And that's because without the right people and the right processes in place, your technology is really a sticker. Yeah. Right, on what's going on. So the first question I have for Desi is, what are the areas that small businesses often overlook when they set out on increasing productivity?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. So if you look at any particular business, so we'll take a common business that a lot of people are familiar with, is a manufacturing business, right? And the example I've been using over the years is, think of an apple pie factory. So you're the owner of an apple pie factory. You make and sell apple pies. So when you think about process improvement, most of the people in that company, in that apple pie factory, they're going to be thinking about apple pies, because that's the physical thing that we make, that's what we sell, and that's what we see every day. So we think about, how can we gather apples faster? How can we process them faster? How can we put them in shells and bake them faster? So we're very focused on the core part of the process, which is the making of the apple pies. And what companies often overlook is all the hidden processes, the informational processes that go in. So there are things that go into an apple pie factory that we don't necessarily think about on an everyday basis. What are their recipes? Who are my suppliers? How do my suppliers operate? How do I store my apples and prevent them from going bad? What's the health of my equipment, and are my equipment performing at the same capacity and the same performance level as when I first purchased them? If they're degrading, what's the cause of that degradation? So these are the hidden things that affect processes that we don't often look at. And sometimes when I look at a process, let's imagine any process, let's say a process has 5 steps. we're always focused on the step that we're most familiar with. But in fact, when processes, they flow from left to right. And a simple problem that happens at the upstream of the process, you know, on the left side of the process, that gets magnified as it flows through the process. So very often what's overlooked are the simple informational problems that happen upstream. It could be a very simple thing. What's stopping the apple pie factory from working productively is the fact that the sales orders that are taken up front have a lot of mistakes in them. Someone has ordered 1,000 apples, but we're producing 50 apples. So these kind of informational errors that happen in upstream processes like order management and sales and marketing, they find their way into the core processes, but they become hidden because we don't see them in their original format anymore. So that's a common mistake. That's sort of my first cut answer at that question is to look at the entire, we call it a value stream, or it's an end-to-end process. And don't just look at a single process that you're familiar with because you work in that department, but rather look at the entire business process to look for opportunities.
Yeah, and that's an important point too, because a lot of times I even seen that, you know, when you talk to different business leaders and even process owners, they often hyper focus on their process alone. And they don't often think of the processes that happen prior to theirs or after theirs or contribute to theirs, you know, kind of like the stream mentality. You only focused on your little stream there, but not the other feeders or where you feed into. So
yeah,
really important points there. And so that kind of nicely segues into, you know, where can small businesses often find that low-hanging fruit? So often we think of productivity, you know, increasing that, and we think, oh, there's a massive technology implementation cost coming down the pipeline. What are some of the low-hanging fruit that we can really look at tackling?
Yeah, so I'm going to give a very fundamental answer to that, because almost everyone, when you talk to them about productivity, they're thinking about, especially when we start talking about technology as well, they're thinking about how we can do things faster. So how can we make those apple pies faster? How can things go faster? So whatever we're doing, how can we do that faster? A simpler, more philosophical way of improving productivity is not to ask the question, how can we do things faster? But how can we not do things at all, right? So if there's things that we don't do at all, we don't have to make them faster, right? So it gets a little bit philosophical, but I'll give an example from a project we had many years ago with an R&D company. So this is a research and development company, and of course, scientists and engineers like to produce tons and tons of reports, and they would produce these massive reports with a lot of technical information. But when we mapped out that process and tried to make that research and development process more efficient and productive, we realized in most of the reports, there were only a few key numbers that were being used by different engineers and scientists. So the question is, why are we producing massive reports? And it turns out those key pieces of information, pieces of data, pieces of insights could be actually, you know, posted into a database and looked up by anyone at any time. So that's an example of not producing a report, instead having a database that people can pull information from. So now you can see the blend of process and technology, but it comes from the initial thinking that before you ask yourself, how can I do things faster? You should ask yourself, what can I not do to begin with?
Yeah. And I think that's such a fundamental question, because oftentimes we do it because we've always done it, or we do it because every sales process has this, or every ops process has this. But how often, you know, as business owners, do we stop and say, why do we even do this in the first place? Right. And so to really think, do we even need to do it at all? Like, you know, and that's a really, really great example.
Emails are a great example. I mean,
yes.
We get tons and tons of emails. I'm notorious for insisting on not having too many emails. So ask yourself the question, when you do get emails from your team, do I need to get this email, or could this topic have been discussed on our regular operations meeting? Or, you know, if you have structured places to address a variety of different topics, you don't necessarily need an email and a text. So you can apply this to almost anything. An email is a good example, a good modern example.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. You know, even meetings are another great example, right? How many meetings have we gone to that we go, oh my goodness, does this need to be a meeting, or could this have been an email?
That's right.
You know, or something plugged into a database that we could look at after the fact. And so it really comes down to, you know, really questioning the purpose and the value that each of these things that we do are doing, and how can we then do it better? All right. So you did share some really great examples. What percentage of businesses that you've probably worked with have at least 50% of their processes documented?
Oh,
And you know where I'm
50%.
going to go with this, right? So
Yeah. I don't think I don't think I've come across a single company so far in the 20 years I've been doing this that have even 50% of their processes documented. And the reason I say is uh, the few companies that do have a lot of their processes documented, they're quite obsolete anyway. So one could argue that they don't have the right processes documented to begin with. So it's uncommon to see companies having all their processes documented.
oh, wow. I want to say, what's the typical percentage that you come across then? Like what's normally, when you walk in, what does that number typically look like?
Yeah, I would say if I had to look at it broadly, I would say maybe 5 to 10% of companies have 50% of their processes documented, and those companies are typically working in industries that are heavily regulated. So we do a lot of work for some heavily regulated companies like utilities, even regulatory bodies. We've started a fair amount of work with cannabis industries, and the growing and distribution of cannabis is heavily regulated. So there's regulatory requirements. So if I add that together, it's probably in the order of no more than 20% of companies have their, 50% of their processes documented.
What's one of the common challenges you come across why companies don't put an emphasis on, documenting processes or even maintaining some kind of, because I know it's not just having, documenting the process, but it's also just having a repository. When you think about things like training and continuous improvement,
Yeah.
what's kind of been the reasons that you get back?
I would say I've had different reasons. I've had different answers to that questions over the years, and I guess the years have given me a small bit of wisdom. So I have a bit of an unusual answer to that question now. So the main reason is that the minute you put a process into place, so there's one thing we don't think about. Every time a human being thinks of a process and it comes into fruition, the first thing that happens for someone else is what I call the anti-process. We are surrounded by smart people that want to figure out a different way of doing it. So the minute you say, I mean, anyone here that's had children, if you tell your child, do things this way, the first thing that child is going to think is, well, how can I not do it, or how can I do it differently? So that kind of curious behavior, it's very human behavior. It's actually a sign of intelligence. So what happens is the minute we put a process in place, people are looking for a workaround. And how can I break that process because I'm the only one that can do it differently? So that human tendency is what breaks the process. After a while, people realize, what's the point? What's the point documenting a process when people are not going to follow it anyways, right? And that's why I always tell people, when you do create a process, put some time into what we call error-proofing that process. So an error-proofing a process means you're designing some things into that process so that it's difficult, if not impossible, to invent an anti-process. And a very easy an easy example to look at would be if you have to enter some information onto a web form. Let's say I go onto a government website and I have to put in my name. I could spell my name wrong. I could spell my address wrong. But if it's accessing a database, it could be a drop-down menu. I can start to spell my name and then it fills in the rest, and it's able to pick up my address. That way I don't have to type in my address. And while that's also a great user experience, it error-proofs me, so I can't put in my neighbor's address, for example, So error-proofing processes, if you error-proof a process, then when you actually document it, you're documenting a process that's going to be sustainable. It's going to last for some time.
That's right. And one of the things I found successful too is, really to have input from the users.
Yeah.
A lot of times we don't focus on the input of the users. We redesign it from a leadership perspective or from, a process redesign perspective, and we don't involve the people that do the process every day. And so they, like you mentioned, they're already probably thinking of ways that they can. Yeah. They've probably already thought of some error-proofing ways too. And so, as we look to implement our own versions of that process for them, if we leave them out, that alone probably, should be a good error-proofing methodology to get that person's buy-in, so that 100%. They're not, consistently trying to find a way to not do the process right.
Yeah, and that methodology of talking to users and capturing their requirements, there are specific process improvement tools designed for that. We call them critical to quality trees and whatnot. That used to dominate the process improvement world, 10 years ago and more. So nothing began without first understanding who the customer, the user was, and capturing their needs and requirements. That part of process improvement has, I wouldn't say it's disappeared, but it hasn't been as prominent in recent years as before. And so now we invent and create all sorts of fantastically cool processes that are from our computers and our phones. And like you said, we didn't begin that transformation by talking to users and customers first. So,
100%. All right. So when it comes to processes and improvement, what role do you believe the people should play? So we've kind of started along that discussion. Yeah. So when we think of the human resources in our organization, what role do you believe they should be playing, and who should be kind of gatekeeping to ensure that that is happening?
Yeah, so in a process improvement, in a properly structured and well-designed process improvement effort, you have different roles for people. So I'll just go over a few of those common roles. And one role is what we call a sponsor. So the sponsor for a particular project, that person has responsibility for ensuring that the resources available for the process improvement are actually available. Those resources include the time of the people, money, any physical assets, space, even pizza for lunch. So all the resources required, that's the responsibility of the sponsor. The sponsor also sets the overall objectives of the project. That is, what are the outcomes? What a sponsor cannot do is be prescriptive about how those particular outcomes will be delivered. That's not the role of the sponsor. Many sponsors will do that, will try to do that. On my watch, it's not going to happen because that's not the role of the sponsor. And then the next group of people that's super duper important is what we call the subject matter experts. And the subject matter experts are actually the knowledgeable people that are working in the process. They're not the people that designed it. They're not the people that owned it. They're the actual people that run those processes every single day. It could be an operator on the floor. It could even be a manager or a CEO, but it's the people that are running that process. So when you do a process improvement, the core of the team has to be made up of those subject matter experts. People call them participants or team players. I call them subject matter experts because they're fundamentally and practically most experienced in how that process works and how that process doesn't work. They experience the pain of the process every single day, and so they should be the core people as part of that process improvement effort. And when they're guided by a process improvement advisor or expert, then they're given the knowledge and the tools to actually transform that process. So in a true traditional process improvement, it's actually the people, the subject matter experts, that are actually changing the process. They may be doing it with the guidance of a process improvement expert, but the solutions and the improvements are actually coming from them.
And I want to just kind of ask as a follow-up to that, how often have you seen, those process users and the actual participants, play key roles in these transformation projects? Because as you mentioned, oftentimes they're not even considered sometimes. So how often, have you seen them become pivotal pieces of that?
Yeah, anytime it's been successful, they've been pivotal because it's kind of like, it's like going to a restaurant and trying to change the menu without talking to the chef, right? I mean, like, it's not going to work, right? You're going to go to an Italian restaurant and you're going to serve Chinese food or something like that. So yeah, so it's quite often that they don't. When a company is run and by the shareholders, for example, when the shareholders have too much of a say in how the operations work, then like you said, that's what happened. They just dictate what the improvements and changes need to be, and they don't take into consideration the expertise available by the staff. And of course, you end up getting processes and systems that don't work well. That results in frustration, turnover in staff. All that happens. But in the cases where you're actually taking a very systematic approach and following, the process improvement methodologies, then you would build a team based on the people in the process, and the solutions you're going to get are going to stick at that point.
Mm-hmm. No, really, really great points there. The next question I want to move us to is from your experience, what areas of the business are both the easiest and the hardest areas to infuse continuous improvement? So let's start with the easy side first. What's the
All
easy
right.
side?
So interestingly enough, the easiest side of a business to improve is the parts of the business that you actually see. So I chose manufacturing as an example, but let's pick a different example. So let's say you're an architectural firm. So what do architects do? They're working with a lot of specifications, and they're putting together designs for the buildings and structures that they're going to subsequently build. So the easiest part the easiest part to change is the most visible part of the business. So if it's an architectural firm, it would be the design side of the business. And I almost say that with tongue in cheek because even that's difficult, right? Even that's difficult. You have to get buy-in from different people, and there's lots of different things to do. But relatively speaking, it's the easier side of the business to change. It's the core operations of the business.
Mm-hmm. And then let's move to the hardest pieces. So what have you found most difficult to change?
Yeah, the hardest pieces to change, there's two sides of the business that are difficult to change. One is the back office, and the other is the sales side. So every business will have some kind of sales function. And they're difficult for two different reasons. The back office is difficult because it just never gets the attention that people, it deserves. So even though the changes might be more informational and system changes, and in a kind of way, they're more inexpensive and easier to do, it just never gets the attention of people because people are looking at the core operations. They're not looking at the back office. So we don't always look at the IT systems and the databases. And that's why you have most of the major banks in the world. I don't know if you've ever gone on the other side of a teller, but they're using some of the most outdated IT systems that you can imagine.
Oh, I've seen some of those. And you're kind of like, and what's interesting, as you mentioned, the back office, when you look at, I won't name any names, but, they've got the coolest apps, they've got the coolest software for user experience. But then you go on the employee experience side and you go, okay, what tools are you guys using? And they go, man, we still have the green screen. Like we still have the black screen with the green dot, stuff in there.
The flashing cursor.
There you go. And it's kind of like, what happened? A part of the company is in 2020 and the other parts, still back where banking began. So
they don't see that part of the business as the money making side of the business, and so it doesn't typically get the attention it needs until it gets critical. The other side is sales, and the reason sales is difficult to streamline or apply process improvement, not that it can't be done. There's two reasons. One thing is the type of people the sales process attracts. There's a certain type of people. I know I'm partly a sales guy myself. I'm a little bit uncontrollable. It's hard to put people, put me in a box. And so that type of character set is dominant in the sales in the sales function. And it's a good thing to have people like that, but they can be challenging to work with in terms of from a process perspective. The other side of it, the sales process is the process with a higher level of uncertainty in it. We go into systems and say, hey, this deal is going to close by July 31st. Yeah, July 31st plus or minus 6 months, right? There's a great degree of uncertainty there. And so the solutions for sales processes, they have to be a little bit more out of the box and less restrictive. So it's not that it can't be done. In fact, it should be done. You shouldn't curtail sales, but you should definitely put a boundary on that chaos so that it becomes something that's repeatable by more salespeople, right?
100%. And I know, actually, in my experience, salespeople have been very receptive to technology and not necessarily change, but they like the technology aspect. Anything that makes them not have to do more paperwork or not have to do this. And so the prevalence of sales administrators and other administrative functions that support sales, I've often seen as a Band-Aid to actually getting the salesperson to do the process, right? So they hire, they keep the personality and they hire someone to take care of the process. And so, it really depends on, as a business, what you think is most strategic. Because as you think about why you do what you do, you can start to either rationalize it to the salesperson, say, hey, if we can't account for your sales and what you're doing, we can't pay your commissions, we don't understand what you're getting commission on. And so the approach becomes, totally different there too. So
Yeah. And I could relate that back to user experience. I sometimes when people put in a CRM system with it, which is a customer relationship management system for the sales process, and they roll that system out, and every salesperson gets a smartphone with an application, and they get an instruction saying you need to enter this and enter this and enter that, and the sales guy is going to go, you mean to say after I've had a 16-hour day, you want me to spend another 2 hours entering this, that, and the other? So that's an example of putting in a system that doesn't take the actual users into account. Or maybe the salesperson works at a construction site. They're bidding on construction facilities, and it's hot and it's humid and they have big fingers and it's not easy to use a phone, right? So unless you take the user requirements into consideration, solutions are not going to be received well.
That's for sure. I really like these new books that they have that come out that you write them and they get transcribed to documents. As you're talking about, improving the process and thinking about user experience, there is technology out there for just about anything, right?
Sure.
There are pieces of technology that you can use for just about everything, but that doesn't stop you from also designing a process and engaging the people as well. And then as you speak to small business owners, because I know you also work with quite a bit of small businesses as well, what advice would you give them as they struggle with the equation of people, process, technology to improve their productivity system?
Yeah, the first advice I would give them is for them to have every company has got, even a small business has got some sort of strategy in their mind. They're looking to increase sales in a particular geography, adopt a new piece of equipment on the floor. So they have some semblance of strategy in their head. First piece of advice I would say is take that strategy and make it into a deployed plan that engages the collective genius of the entire organization. So when strategy is just built and run by a few people at the top, it doesn't engage the entire creativity of the whole organization. But if you take that strategy and you're able to cascade it to different levels, you can change the currency. So, at the highest level, the currency of the strategy could be, shareholder value. You take it to senior management, it could be top line revenue. You take it to operations, it could be reduced lead time and increased capacity. Take it to the worker level, it could be, getting home by 5 o'clock so I can have dinner with my family. So if you're able to cascade the strategy into the different currencies within the business, because not everybody can work for shareholder value. But I did a project once, and the objective of it was for a client in downtown Toronto, and a lot of these employees, they tried to get their work done as fast as possible so they can catch the train back to home. That's what they tried to do. So the objective was called the 5 p.m. project, because the objective was to get done by 5 p.m. so they could catch the 5:30 train.
There you go.
When you coalesce them to that, they're happy, they're supportive, they're fully engaged, and of course, all sorts of improvements are going to happen as a result. So we've translated business strategy into an objective that they can actually, put their minds and bodies to, right?
Mm-hmm. No, perfect. And it's very important, like you said, to really understand the currency across the organization, because what matters to different people, is important, and it either increases or prevents adoption of it. And I can't tell you how many projects fall sideways because people don't have the buy-in, or they don't have the ability to get people to buy in. And it comes all too with change management, right? So, talking about a 5 p.m., people will get behind that, and your change management's easier because everybody's on board with this 5 p.m. project. But, you start to call it shareholder value, whatever, 10xing shareholder value. And all of a sudden people are like, I don't care about that. That's not important to me. I got to leave by 5. Tell me what I got to do and I got to go. So no, that's very important. And it's important to also recognize that you need all 3 of those pieces. You need the people, you need the process, and you also need the technology to manage out there. And then in your opinion, when should businesses leverage people or employees for 10x growth versus bringing in outside expertise like yourself?
I think they should always begin with the people inside first. The reason I say that is there's a famous saying that used to come back in the day. People used to say, never outsource what you don't know. So what happens is, in this particular case, if you have a problem in your company, and you don't understand the problem and you just outsource it, a consultant is going to come and take advantage of that. I'm not saying every consultant will, but there are consultants that will take advantage of your ignorance of your own problem. So it should always begin with you trying to solve your problem, getting stuck in some kind of way, and using some kind of internal wisdom to solicit help from someone else. That's how we should raise our children. That's how we raise our families and communities as well. You should always begin trying to solve the problem on your own, and having the wisdom to know that, hey, at this point, I can smell that I might not be on the right path here, but I'm committed to, once you start, you're committed to solving that problem. So there's an internal commitment, and then invite people in accordingly to help you along that journey. So it's always your journey that you're inviting people into. It's not a problem that you've outsourced to a consultant, because if you do that, you're going to pay more to that consultant than the problem is worth. So
that's very true. That's very true. And it's an important point that you raised there with people coming from the outside coming in. Everybody's expertise is also different. So when you think about someone coming into your organization, the amount of downtime that's going to take them to kind of diagnose what's wrong, versus if you had that internal, expert being able to kind of help you get closer to that problem, will definitely save you both time and money.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Expertise. All right. So as we wrap up this section of our conversation, can you share? I know you've got lots of tips, years of expertise here. Can you share 2 to 3 of your tips for increasing productivity that you found that's worked most successful for you?
Sure. So the first thing to improve up productivity, this is whether you're an individual working in a department or you're looking at entire processes. The first thing is to be able to visualize all the different outputs, all the different in-process outputs that you want to see. So I'll go back to my apple pie factory. So I could look at the apple pie factory and I could write down all the different things that need to happen in order to produce an apple pie. But rather than do that, a better way to do this is to really imagine what do all the in-process outputs look like. So I'm going to visualize some apples. I'm going to visualize some cut up apples. I'm going to visualize a shell. I'm going to visualize apples inside the shell, and I'm going to visualize my final product. So if you're able to bound the process by the very specific deliverables you see in between, if you take that step to try to map out those specific outputs, the second question to ask yourself is, what's the least amount that I have to do to produce those deliverables, right? If you take that approach, it's like the lazy person's approach to process, then you're going to naturally do the least amount to produce those deliverables, because what happens is the deliverables are more important than the actions. What we tend to do is, as human beings, we're focused on the things that we do. So for example, I'm on a personal training, personal fitness program right now. I get focused on my running, I get focused on my push-ups, I get focused on all the different things I do. But where I should be focused is on the different metrics I'm trying to accomplish. So if I focus simply on the physical results that I want, then I'm going to do the least amount of work to realize them. So yeah, the shift should be towards the actual outputs you want rather than all the actions you would want to do to accomplish them. The actions will come up pretty easily once you visualize the outputs. So that's I'm not sure if I answered the question, but
you did.
It sounded good to me.
That's definitely important. And I think that's a different way, because a lot of times you go into organizations, they go, write down all the steps that you take to do your process. And so,
Yes.
Really focusing on, on the, micro outputs or the different outputs that, come out before you end up with the final product is a great way to start. Is there another strategy that you would like to share with us?
The other thing is, so now when you look at all the different activities that have to be done to produce a variety of deliverables, lots of us will bundle activities together to make them big activities. So I'll just give you an example. So if I have to clean my home, most of us think like, hey, you know what? The weekend is for cleaning my home. So you spend all of Saturday or all of Sunday, whatever, cleaning up your house. I used to do that and I never got it done. So because it's a big activity. So what I have for my home is I have a cleaning schedule. So all I do is a certain bucketed amount of cleaning every day. So it might be just clean this or it might be clean this. So I've broken it down into small little buckets of time. so that it never feels overwhelming. So the house is always in a state of relative health. And the concept, that the term we use for that is called level loading your efforts. So level loading your efforts is like, rather than doing activities that take a large amount of time and a large amount of time, you break them down into small little pieces and scatter them across the week, across the month, across the year, so that you're always engaged in a certain amount of activity. Rather, because there's a lot of variation in the day to begin with. So that's the second tip I would say, is just level load your activities. And if you make an effort to do that, you'll come up with very non-intuitive procedures. People always feel like they need to complete this entire task before they're moving on to something else. But you can complete a portion of the task and complete the next portion later on, if you do it right and you design it properly. And the benefits you get from level loading are just tremendous. It allows you to get that 5:30 train every day. That's the biggest benefit. So.
No, for sure. That's a great idea. And I see that applied to learning too, when you think about continuous improvement and micro learning.
That's right.
Everybody in a series of trainings for a week, every week we get, 4 hours here or 2 hours here. And you're getting good value because you're breaking it down into bite-sized chunks that are valuable. And
That's
I can
right.
definitely see that working too for your process. If you've got, your 2020 goals probably got a little bit derailed this year, but if you look at, what the outcomes are that you want to have, and breaking those down into, what can we do every month or every week or bi-weekly to move us forward? What does that look like? And how can we get people involved and engaged around that? And then the final question before, did you want to add another?
Yeah, the last one I would say is, take 100% of your activities and squish them into 80% of your time. So all your time, if you look at a person, we sleep for 8 hours and we're working for 16 hours, of those 16 hours, squish everything into 80%. So that 80% of your time should be your structured time, dominated by schedules and goals and actions. And you should always leave, it's going to sound crazy, but you should leave 20% of your time available to do anything you want. It's like, I'm a musician, so sometimes when I'm planning for a concert, I have structured pieces that I'm rehearsing, but I also leave some time for my rehearsals where I just play whatever comes to mind. There's no intention, there's no goal, and there's no structure. So that 20% of unstructured time that's not dominated by structure is kind of the rejuvenation that we need to be committed to the 80%, and vice versa. They work together. A lot of us are, we're working 120% of the time, and that itself leads to a certain level of, compromise in productivity.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, you talk about that 80-20 rule, and we talk about, creativity and finding time to rejuvenate. And I can just see some business owners going, what?
Yes.
Never seen that before. And hopefully, as we have been sharing some of our tips about, productivity and really focusing on what the goal is and how to accomplish it, you're starting to see a couple percentages of your day now available for that downtime and creativity. And then our final question before I hand it over to our participants to ask you some questions is, are there any resources? Because I know you've dropped some really great tips. You've mentioned a lot of continuous improvement terminologies as well. Yeah. Are there any resources that you can share with us that you found particularly helpful when it comes to helping businesses, enhance their productivity?
Yeah, I think probably the best resources that I know of is, there's actually an organization, they're called the Lean Enterprise Institute. Not a lot of people may know about them anymore, but the founders of the Lean Enterprise Institute, they were the original people that brought the productivity improvement methods of the Japanese to North America. So before it was called Lean, before you had Six Sigma, before you had process improvement, those original folks, they started this non-for-profit organization called the Lean Enterprise. It's a very old website. It might not be as savvy as we're used to these days, but the content there is good. And if you really want to understand flow, they have a lot of literature on there, but they have one type of literature, they're called workbooks. So if you go on the Lean Enterprise Institute and look for their workbooks, most of us in the profession call it the red book, the blue book, and the green book, because you'll notice those books happen to be red, blue, and green. Those books are fantastic because they're very prescriptive. You can take those books to your organization. They're almost like a consultant inside a book, and you can follow those instructions and you can do it. A lot of books are on the subject are inspirational and philosophical, and they leave you thoroughly interested in the subject, but you can't necessarily do anything about it. These workbooks from the Lean Enterprise, they're gold. You can actually take it to your desk and do something after reading them. So I would go there as your first resource.
For sure. And I will definitely ask Desi for that link so that we can share that with the recording as well.
You bet.
All right. I want to thank Desi for sharing with us. And at this point,